Okay, everybody, it's now 2 o'clock, so it's time to resume the hearing sessions into the examination of the submitted Crawley Borough Local Plan to 2040. Now, in terms of our programme and timetable, this afternoon was intended, or is still largely to be, a session dedicated to transport, or the start of transport matters and considerations. Some of you may have joined us for that session be aware we've still got a couple of residual matters we need to discuss from this morning's session in relation to Gatwick. So if people can just bear with us while we conclude the Gatwick discussion, we'll then have a brief break, so if anybody who's not here for transport this afternoon can leave, and then we'll do the normal introductions for the transport session thereafter, so bear with us. So on that basis then, if we can continue with and conclude parts of the Gatwick session from this morning, and in relation to our agenda item, I think it's agenda item 5, we now move on to, in terms of policy GAT2, which is the policy that applies to safeguarding, or safeguarded land. Obviously, we're mindful that there was a previous policy to this effect in the 2015 local plan. We've obviously seen and had regard to the statement submitted, it's document GA21, which is a joint correspondence from the Borough Council and Gatwick Airport in relation to policy GAT2. And there are various proposed modifications from the council in terms of what was the submitted policy. So my starting question for the Borough Council is, obviously there was a previous 2015 local plan policy. I think it provided a framework for what was then described as minor development. The submitted policy is now intending to refer to small-scale development. Just give the council an opportunity to explain what's kind of informed its approach within the submitted plan to policy GAT2, and how that now sort of flows through into kind of the further sort of proposed modifications to the policy. Is it Mr. Lepage first?
Yes, that's myself. Thank you very much. Following the November hearings, we have engaged further with GAL, and we've agreed between us modifications to policy GAT2. They're set out, as you've mentioned, in our note submitted on the 15th of December. That's the GA21, together with Gatwick's confirmation in a letter dated 13th of December, which is appended to that note. And they're also included in our mod schedule 07E. The modifications to GAT2 and Para 1019 are intended to clarify the types of small-scale development. We have changed the wording from minor because of the difference in sort of general planning terminology about minor development. So we're talking about small-scale development that's acceptable within safeguarding, and also to give further guidance as to the types of changes acceptable for employment buildings, but not to include redevelopment, as was mentioned briefly in the discussions in November. We have also covered temporary uses, which were already set out in our earlier submissions. So I don't know if there's any specific questions that you've got on the modified wording, but that's our reasons for it.
Thank you. Just in terms of how the policy is operated, or is previous, or is intended to operate, I mean, is it understood as by what is meant by incompatible development? Does that kind of get tested, or is there a kind of, in practice, a kind of an understanding that safeguarding in itself kind of serves as a deterrent for kind of significant development proposals within this area?
Yes, I would suggest, obviously, we mentioned safeguarding. We always consult with the airport on any applications within the safeguarded area, and I think there is a general understanding of most landowners in the safeguarded area as to what's acceptable. We're just trying to clarify it a little bit more, particularly in that paragraph 1019, particularly related to employment uses.
Thank you. And in terms of some of the comments and submissions that have been made in relation to policy GAT2 and the overall approach, not everybody is here, but obviously Aurora are in terms of their land interests, but then I'll invite them to set out the kind of various modifications they're seeking to the policy. But from others, there seems to be a sort of an indication that this kind of policy approach is unduly inhibiting kind of investment or opportunities to kind of invest in existing sites, potentially over a long period, over the next sort of 14 years, until there's potentially an outcome in terms of the second wide-spaced runway implementation. I mean, is this a fair and kind of proportionate approach to kind of affecting those existing premises, largely, as I say, employment premises, particularly when we're sort of getting into kind of the fringes of the Manor Royal employment area?
I think we've sought to give as much flexibility as we can in agreement with the airport, because what we don't want is a constant issue as to what's meant by different wording interpretations. We've looked at some of the proposals that have come in from the representations, and that's where we've got into the small scale improvements and normally acceptable within a similar footprint. So amendments, improvements, I think they were talking about changes of roofs, solar panels, all that sort of thing would, I think, come under this definition and be acceptable within safeguarding. What we've moved away from is complete demolition and redevelopment. So I think that's where you get into a much more significant and cost implication and so on for the future of delivery of the runway.
Thank you. If I can bring in, is it Mr. Thornley from Aurora Property Group? I know you've got various kind of site interests and have raised comments and suggested modifications you'd like to see to the safeguarded land policy.
Yes, thank you, sir. I mean, first, because I appreciate this is meant to be in the earlier session, I'll be as quick and direct as possible. We do welcome the changes that were made in December 2023. They took on board a lot of the comments we were after. But basically, at this place, boiling it down to what we're after, we think further modifications could be made to further unlock some of these sites within the safeguarded zone, which at present it's very difficult to substantially invest into any of these sites, employment sites particularly, with the current designation over it. So whilst I appreciate that they've specifically excluded redevelopment from the type of development that would be allowed under GAT2, we think there should be scope for some redevelopment within the safeguarded zone, such as the sites where it would be uneconomical just to refurbish or to do minor extensions to bring them back into sort of optimal use. That's the first point. The second point is that we would appreciate further clarity on some of the terminology used in the December 23 modifications, specifically what minor building works would entail. Does this, for example, follow the DMPO definition, or is it a more subjective approach, sort of taken on a case-by-case basis? Would proportional extensions, something kind of akin to a greenbelt policy where 30% is often used as a slightly arbitrary but helpful figure because it provides clarity for prospective applicants. And the similar goes for sort of what the term small scale would represent, particularly when coupled with similar footprint, because obviously around an airport, upward extensions are extremely limited. So having to sort of maintain a similar footprint to an existing building would severely limit its employment optimisation. So in summary, we think a couple more modifications could be made, whilst we do welcome the modifications that have been made. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to understand from your perspective, Mr. Thornley, as somebody with an interest in the sort of the property market in this area, I mean, given the previous plan, the existing local plan safeguards areas for a second runway, a second wide-spaced runway, this plan in turn is continuing to safeguard areas for the potential for a second wide-spaced runway. In terms of existing property and the appetite for kind of further investment in that stock, is it to some extent affected or dampened by that kind of prospect or that kind of potential of change anyway? I mean, I just wonder whether what's kind of potentially going to be further prevented or inhibited given the situation we're in.
Yeah, understood. So, I mean, at length, sort of the safeguarding zone has been discussed during the previous session and then this morning, and there is significant amount of uncertainty regarding the delivery of the second runway, and I'm not going to get into the whole arguments because various other lawyers and panels have got into that. But essentially, because the safeguarded zone has been in place since I think 2007, if we get to the end of this proposed plan period, we'll have had essentially a moratorium on any investment around employment around Crawley, Heathrow Airport for sort of 30 years or so, which does, is a significant inhibitor to looking at potential redevelopment.
And from your clients or occupiers' perspective, I mean, is refurbishment or that kind of level of investment not enough to kind of extend the longevity of existing kind of building stock?
Possibly in a short term, but looking at sort of the long-term objectives of our stock, no, is the short answer.
Thank you. And I can come back to the Borough Council in terms of the points that were raised by Mr. Thornley in terms of whether there's scope for further kind of amendments to the modifications. I think in terms of potentially the flexibility that the Aurora Group are looking for, or whether there's still going to be kind of residual issues around interpreting the policy in terms of what's meant by small scale, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely look at the clarity of the wording of the policy. I don't think, having had the further discussions that we've had since the November hearings with Gatwick, that we would be looking at the flexibility I think he's really looking for, which is about redevelopment. I think that would be a step too far for the airport, and we would, we're looking to agree a position with them on a policy that we're trying to implement on land that we're safeguarding. Thank you.
And in terms of the footprint point, I mean, I've sort of got the impression from previous hearing discussions, the scope for upward extension is probably very limited, if at all, within the safeguarded area.
I think as we've come on to on DD5, it is subject to the aerodrome safeguarding and the height limits and consultations with the airport's aerodrome safeguarding technical team. So there is some scope. Obviously, the closer you get to the airport, and safeguarding is closer to the airport. We were talking yesterday about the town centre, which is further away. So, yeah, the height limits are probably more significant the closer you get to the airport.
And a question to the Borough Council and to maybe also to bring in Gatwick, in terms of the resistance to kind of wholesale redevelopment, is that from a kind of a sustainability kind of perspective? In terms of the potential shelf life of such developments, or is it a concern that it's going to significantly inhibit a scheme coming forward?
I think it comes down to the wording at the end of paragraph 1019, where we're talking about incompatible development within safeguarded land regarded as development adding constraints or increase the cost or complexity of the development or operation of an additional runway. And that's where we're looking at, if you've built a new building, it's going to obviously cost more to compulsory purchase that and replace it.
Don't know, Mr. Norwood, whether you wanted to add to that point.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think there is, as the Borough Council have said, there is. It's about the wording in paragraph 1019 about the complexity and the costs of the development. But I think there is a point about whether it would be sustainable to knock down a building that has only recently been built if when the second runway comes forward. It would seem to be strange that you're allowing something to happen in the knowledge that once the second runway project comes forward, it would need to be demolished. So I think it's a bit of both, sir.
Thank you for that. I've obviously got your representations, Mr. Thornley, and the points that you've made will reflect further on the modifications that the council has put forward. I don't think we're necessarily inviting the council at this stage to do any sort of further revision, but if they, on further reflection, think there's scope for further refinement, we may be able to consider that in due course. But okay, thank you for that. And then I can just move briefly then on to policy DD2, which is the aerodrome safeguarding policy referred to a moment ago by Ms. Lepage. Obviously various modifications are being put forward. From looking at them, they seem to sort of be more in the camp of kind of factual, kind of technical updates rather than changing the kind of the objective of the policy. Is that a fair reading of the proposed changes?
Yes, absolutely. It's policy DD5. It's included in the same note that we referred to earlier, GA21. They are factual amendments, all based on wording from the aerodrome safeguarding team at Gatwick. And again, Gatwick's confirmed that they agree with those wording changes.
Thank you. I think in Mr. Norwood, in your correspondence, you've referred to them as additional modifications, which is a kind of technical name for minor changes that you don't necessarily need for plan soundness. Is that a kind of the general view that this is just the plan needs to be updated as a matter of fact for these kind of changes rather than it's inconsistent with national policy?
Yeah, that's correct, sir. These are technical matters that have been dealt with by our technical safeguarding team and agreed with Crawley, so that's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. So it's probably something we're probably not going to recommend as main modifications, and they're probably changes that the council can do of its own volition to the plan. Is there anything further people wish to say in relation to policy GAT2 or policy DD5? No. Okay, thank you. That, in large part, brings to conclusion the session that started at 9:30 this morning. So thank you for accommodating that. I don't know if the Aurora Group are going to stay for the rest of this. You are welcome to now leave. So thank you for your contribution. So whilst Mr. Thornley is quietly exiting the chamber, everybody here, I think, is for this afternoon's session on, I think it's matter, we now move on to matter 10, although we will have an overlap with part of matter 5 in relation to the boundary of the safeguarded land area. Here for matter 10 on transport. For those who've joined us for this slightly delayed session, just to remind everyone, my name's David Spencer. I'm one of the two inspectors alongside, on my right, Mr. Glenn Rawlings, appointed to carry out the independent examination of the submitted Crawley Borough local plan. Could just remind people for this session to ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please. And whilst we're here in the Town Hall building for various reasons, not least health and safety, I now have to ask Charlotte Glancy, our Programme Officer on my left, to just take us through some general housekeeping rules, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is just a brief update on the just the fire procedure and the recording of the sessions. So there are no scheduled fire drills. So in the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main entrance doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the Town Hall multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you are unable to use the stairs, please wait in the chamber and you will be guided by a member of staff in the evacuation to the evacuation lift. These hearings are being recorded and filmed to be later uploaded to the Council's YouTube site. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during a webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy, and these specific hearings will be retained for at least 2 years. So anyone seated around the chamber and in the gallery could be filmed by the automated camera system, and your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering into the room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Can I just check with the council if the leaving the the room is been resolved?
Yes, we had a heartfelt apology for that having been missed prior to today. So it has been sorted, and people will be able to leave through the front exit at the end of the session.
And press the green button.
And press the green button.
There we
yes.
go.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Well, there's an incentive to keep contributions short if you want to get home tonight. Okay, so we're here for matter 10 on transport infrastructure. In the usual style, it'd be helpful to both Mr. Rollings and myself, as we're going to be jointly taking this session, if people who are going to speak on transport and the transport agenda we've identified, if they can introduce themselves, and if I can start for the Borough Council and colleagues, please.
Yeah, myself, Sally LePage, the Strategic Planning Manager here at Crawley, and Anthony Masson, Senior Planning Officer, and I'll pass over to Elizabeth to introduce the Council's team supporting us, particularly on transport modelling.
So Elizabeth Brigden, Planning Policy Manager at Crawley Borough Council. Today we have a number of supporting officers and consultants who are here to sort of help with answering any of your questions, particularly if they're very technical. I may actually ask people to introduce themselves, actually, just because there is quite a long list and they are sort of interspersed. But essentially what we have is the County Council officers and also two consultant teams, one from Stantec who supported us with the transport modelling, and the other from Sistra who supported us with the Crawley Western Link study. But I will suggest that they probably best to just introduce who they are so that you get to see exactly who people are.
Crawley Borough Council. Ian Warren, Senior Planning Officer at Crawley Borough Council.
Hello, I'm Guy Parfait, Senior Transport Planner at West Sussex County Council.
So I'm Paul Gebbert, Senior Associate from Stantec.
Darryl Hemmings, Transport Planning and Policy Manager at West Sussex County Council.
Alberto Marcheselli, Senior Engineer from Sistra.
Neil Lyles, Associate Director, Sistra.
Eleanor Harmon, West Sussex County Council, Principal Planning Officer.
And then moving around the room for Gatwick Green, please.
Tony Cross on behalf of Gatwick Green.
John Williams from Steer on behalf of Gatwick Green.
James Pereira, Council on behalf of Gatwick Green.
Okay, then coming around the room for Gatwick Airport Limited.
David Ellis for Gatwick Airport.
Richard Higgins for Gatwick Airport.
Tim Norwood from Gatwick Airport.
Heather Sargent, Council for Gatwick Airport.
Lydia Granger, Planning Manager, Gatwick Airport.
Adam Perk, Planning Director, RPS.
Graham Keane, King's Council for Ardmore. Sorry, it's wrong. I'm afraid. Graham Keane for Ardmore Limited.
Suzanne Holloway from Vale Williams on Ardmore Limited.
And Nick Bradshaw from Connect Consultants for Ardmore Limited.
And moving on to the front row, please.
Nigel DeWitt, National Highways.
Nigel Wharton from Jacobs, representing National Highways.
Thank you for that. Now, hopefully people have seen our agenda for this afternoon's session. It's based on our previously circulated matters, issues and questions in relation to matter 10 on transport. I should probably point out, to the benefit of everybody here in the examination, if you've not seen or had seen them already, the examination has received an updated statement of common ground between the Borough Council and National Highways back in December. We've also received an updated statement of common ground with West Sussex County Council of the 2nd of January of this year. And then very recently, at the start of this week, on the 8th of January, we received an updated statement of common ground with Gatwick Green Limited, and all of those documents are in the examination library and have relevance to this afternoon's session. And the first item we wanted to touch upon in terms of the transport evidence, and in particular where it's led in some proposed modifications that are now before the examination in terms of reflecting and responding to the Department for Transport Circular 0122. This is our MIQ 10.1. Appreciate there was obviously a previous statement of common ground with National Highways on the extent to which the plan as submitted reflected Circular 0122, and perhaps summarise it. National Highways will correct me, but kind of if this is wrong, but the move away from kind of predict and provide to a more sort of vision and validate type approach. I think on further reflection, I'll just invite the council to touch upon this. This led more specifically in terms of proposed modifications for I'll describe it as sort of the strategic allocated site within the plan at Gatwick Green in terms of reflecting Circular 1 of 22. I don't know who from the council would just...
Yes, I'm happy just to speak on that. Yes, we did have some exchanges, I think, in the stage 1 hearings, and we National Highways colleagues made suggestions in relation to the Gatwick Green allocation that they thought there was scope to more clearly tie the policy in, I suppose, with the emphasis within the circular on a vision-led approach. So we've suggested a number of amendments within the policy that are really intended just to include this as a thread to be, to be undertaken alongside particularly the master planning stage of the site. Broadly speaking, we think that the plan and the allocation is very much kind of reflecting the vision and validate approach, but we were happy to kind of engage with National Highways and with Gatwick Green in relation to how the policy might better, might more sort of clearly and explicitly reflect that.
Thank you for that. And obviously they're before us in the latest schedule of proposed modifications in document 7E. If I can just come first to National Highways, I appreciate Mr. DeWitt, you've signed a statement of common ground with the Borough Council, but just to kind of be reassured that this is a modification in the right direction from your organisation's perspective.
The short answer is yes. As Mr. Warren said, we had positive engagement with the council on how we could address the points we raised at the hearing sessions in November, and it's been accommodated, those proposed changes within the policy, which we find acceptable. It refers to the master plan work and the vision-led approach, which we've been assured, and that addresses our concerns.
And similarly, if I can turn to Gatwick Green again, indicated you've signed a statement of common ground.
Yes, so we have some with CBC. Did you get the first bit? Thank you. Apologies for that. And on top of that, we have, as you'll know, also submitted within our appendix, our matter 10, appendix to Rep 008-03, we have submitted our own vision for taking forward Gatwick Green in line with Circular 01/2022, and also assessed how we currently comply with that in the proposal set out within our transport appraisal.
Thank you for that. I've got no further questions in relation to just item 1A on the agenda. I thought I'd just pick that up first as a proposed modification since we last sat in November. If there are no further submissions on that point, then can we move on to item 1B on our agenda, and this follows on from our MIQ 10.2 and probably also in part to our supplementary questions at 10.36, and it's being assured really that the impact of the local plan strategy on the strategic road network and the identified mitigation that's provided in the latest infrastructure plan, and there's now an updated infrastructure delivery schedule, I think it's IP 08 of December 2023, can be appropriately accommodated and mitigated without kind of having a severe impact on the road network. I think in this particular question we'd like to hear from first from the Borough Council in terms of the work it's undertaken and why it's of a view that the plan would not have a severe impact on the strategic road network, and then I think we'd like to hear from National Highways in terms of your latest position, and similarly from West Sussex County Council, and in particular this kind of proposed approach now that there'll be a kind of a mechanism for kind of collaboration going forward if the plan is found sound and adopted.
Thank you. Yes. So the proposed mitigations on the strategic highway fall out really of the Crawley transport study and the scenario testing included as part of that identified these impacts at junctions 10 and 11, and that sort of process and the suggested mitigations was undertaken in collaboration with the West Sussex County Council and National Highways were sort of engaged in that study. So we've taken, recognising the importance of the efficiency and safety and reliability of the strategic highways network, we've identified that as critical infrastructure necessary to support the local plan, alongside the other schemes that are on the local highways network, and through discussions with mainly with National Highways, but there have been sort of related, I suppose, discussions with West Sussex County Council. We've developed the infrastructure delivery schedule as a way of providing greater clarity about the projects, their costs, and the roles of different their indicative costs as shown in the transport study, and the roles of different organisations in relation to those projects, and I guess as part of that as well, in the sort of opening, there's a sort of introductory table before the main table of the infrastructure delivery schedule, which is intended to give a kind of overview of the kinds of resources that we're expecting will be available in terms of developer contributions and other kind of anticipated sources, broadly speaking, that will be available to assist with mitigation of infrastructure, mitigation of development impact through provision of infrastructure. So the intention there is to illustrate how you can look at the indicative costs of the infrastructure alongside the indicative resources in terms of their magnitude, order of magnitude, really. So that document reflects our kind of interaction with National Highways and West Sussex, and also reflected in the statements. The statement of common ground with National Highways is this. We've called it a sort of monitor and manage approach, where I suppose to allow for the difficulty of being over a sort of whole local plan period, the difficulty of knowing precisely when particular mitigations will be required to be delivered. In the part of the IDS, we have this sort of trajectory that sets out the sort of delivery trajectories of the housing and the employment development, alongside the critical infrastructure schemes that we've identified. That's in a way meant to represent a kind of starting point, also bearing in mind the sort of vision and validate approach which is sort of feeds through the transport strategy, whereby the sort of upfront there's the emphasis on sustainable forms of mitigation, so that the extent of highways mitigation projects or strategic road network is reduced to a kind of residual extent and amount that isn't able to be as far as can be projected, resolved through those sustainable mitigations on the basis of reasonable assumptions. So in light of that, the kind of phasing we've set out is kind of mindful that we're seeking to position those kind of critical highways mitigations sort of in the middle to later period of the local plan period, and in the sort of upfront period to seek to implement sustainable mitigations which will put us on the way to the modal shift assumptions that are alongside a sort of ongoing programme of sustainable mitigations, will I suppose, enable us to sort of implement that strategy whereby it's a residual, these are residual impacts that we're dealing with. And so because of that, there's an element of kind of uncertainty about exactly when those mitigations are going to be required. So the proposed sort of ongoing approach of collaboration is intended to kind of provide a sort of more responsive kind of monitoring regime, which is able to look at the development that's happening and the evidence in relation to traffic demand and identify when those mitigations are required. Yes, hopefully that gives you a summary of that.
Thank you for that. I mean, if I could turn to National Highways, and maybe West Sussex want to come in on this as well. I mean, in terms of what's being put forward to us, and it will be, or the council's put forward as a modification to the plan, this kind of reference to ongoing working, ongoing collaboration through an infrastructure management group. In terms of what I've been reading, what I've subsequently heard from Mr. Warren, I mean, is National Highways, particularly from the strategic road network perspective, assured by the approach that Crawley are putting forward, in light of there's obviously certain evidence we have in front of us in terms of mitigation, potential costs, timings, etc. These things can often flex and change depending on precisely when they're required. So, is it Mr. DeWitt? Are you assured by the sort of the approach that's being put forward?
We, National Highways, agree with the ongoing approach in terms of the potential role that the Transport Infrastructure Management Group could play in terms of the monitor and manage, and how that could be effective. Picking up on Mr. Warren's point there, that through that effective regime, you can keep the infrastructure requirements and the time of the delivery under review to make sure that what is delivered is proportionate and can be as sustainable as possible, whether that's through taking stock on an annual basis, because there are so many variables, as we know, that can change, not least governments. But so the ongoing process, we welcome that introduction, but we will touch on that, I think, on part 1C in terms of how that's embedded in the plan. But just in terms of reassurance, I think there's two elements. There's the ongoing reassurance during the plan period, and there is the plan that's the subject of the examination and its soundness. And the plan itself, nor the IDS, although I would like to make the point that we've been very happy with the way the IDS has evolved. We've really engaged well with the council, and they've been very receptive, and I think it's turned into a really useful document with the trajectory of development and the infrastructure alongside. But what's lacking is evidence actually supporting the mitigation, the time of the mitigation for the SRN. I can confirm that what has been identified is through the collaborative work with ourselves, Crawley Borough Council and the County Council, and through Stantec's work on the transport evidence. So it's not what the mitigation is required, which we've accepted, it's the timing of that alongside the development. And in terms of now, there is a lack of evidence. I'm going to turn to my colleague Nigel Walkden who will support us. He would explain potentially how that could be addressed during this examination phase in terms of supporting evidence.
Thank you. As my colleague Mr. DeWitt has said, the issue is to do with certainty at the present time on when the strategic infrastructure will actually be delivered. The IDS itself states that for two pieces of infrastructure, one will be required in the period after 2030 and the other will be required in the period after 2035. But we think that's rather vague in that that could mean 2039, 2040. And we want to avoid a situation whereby there's a dispute with anybody who thinks that, well, if it's in the local plan after 2035 or after 2030, that can run right to the end of the plan period. And if it runs right to the end of the plan period, there's a risk that the strategic infrastructure itself will follow the development rather than be in place when the infrastructure is required. I think there's two ways around this. I mean, firstly, the plan could do an assessment, and it's not an onerous task, to do an assessment of how much traffic will actually trigger the need for that infrastructure. Now, there is a housing trajectory there, and it's a question of, well, how many trips will be generated to trigger the need for that infrastructure to be in place. And based upon that trajectory, what year will it be in place? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, as Mr. Warren has said, through a monitor and manage plan, which we are in agreement with, whereby cumulative development through the plan can be monitored, and we can see actually when that development comes along, how much traffic it's actually generating, and look at the appropriate year for the implementation of that infrastructure, or potentially that the infrastructure itself is not required. So there are potential ways forward which we would be amenable to. Just at the moment, there's no certainty through the plan on when that infrastructure is required.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of what's being put forward there, in terms of, I'm assuming here we're referring to improvements, junction improvements at the M23. Is it junctions? Is it 10 and 11? If the council can assist on this point, the infrastructure delivery schedule identifies this. As I've heard from National Highways, there are at the moment broad trigger points in terms of an after a certain date they're likely to be required, and whether there can be sort of further specificity as to exactly when they might be, when they should be delivered, or alternatively the suggestion of a monitor and manage approach. I mean, there are various modifications coming forward in terms of the policies that are before us. We've referred to, and they'll reference back to the infrastructure delivery schedule, which I understand will be a living document, so it will be continually looked at and updated, presumably also through this kind of transport infrastructure kind of working group type arrangement. But I don't know if there's an initial reaction from either the Borough Council or its partners at West Sussex in terms of what I'm hearing from National Highways in terms of potentially some additional planned content, I think, at this stage, in terms of certainty on when when infrastructure will be required, or perhaps an alternative of a sort of a more explicit monitor and manage type approach. Is that what's being suggested, Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, sir. It's not either or. It's a case of the ongoing process would be the monitor and manage through the group. So that be ongoing. But what we're saying now in terms of what's before us and the infrastructure delivery schedule and the phasing, there's not substantive evidence to justify that. And as Mr. Walton highlighted, the mitigation needs to be linked to the trips generated and the distribution of trips. That's how we always approach mitigation to the SRN. And I'm sure there's that potential through work with potentially Stantec and County Council to look at the established modelling and to see the development strategy in the local plan in combination with commitments. At what point does the evidence point to this improvement to the SRN needs to be placed at this time, because otherwise there could be an unacceptable impact on the safety, reliability or the operational efficiency of the SRN, and that would not be acceptable to the National Highways.
I can turn to Mr. Parfect in the first instance.
Yes, the County Council have been in discussion with the Borough Council and have agreed the approach to set up the Transport Infrastructure Management Group as the best way to monitor the impacts of the plan, the delivery of developments, and the delivery of the mitigation measures, both the highway mitigation and the sustainable mitigation measures. So in terms of how many trips generated by the development, both housing and employment within the plan, are going through the critical junctions which have been identified for highway improvements to motorway junctions, and there's also a junction on our network, the Ifield roundabouts. That will depend partly on how quickly the development sort of comes forward through the planning system and whether it's implemented straight away after reaching achieving consent, or if there's further delays after that. And also there's a balancing between the sustainable transport improvements, which are intended to improve public transport mode share and reduce the traffic impacts, both of new development, but also serving the town as a whole. And there's the traffic generation from the new development. So yes, it is possible to look with modelling or junction modelling incrementally at the specific junctions concerned, to see sort of how many trips reach that junction. But there is the interaction as well with how the sustainable mode share is performing, and the sustainable transport schemes are coming forward in terms of how many residential units and how many jobs on the employment sites are coming forwards. What that turns into numbers of trips going through those junctions. So if you look through junction models to determine the exact trigger points at the junctions, some of the ones on National Highways network, we also have to sort of bear in mind how the rest of the network is performing, and also what happens with background traffic levels in the meantime. The transport modelling that's been done has got a sort of robust level of background traffic assumption, with committed developments being taken into account. And for external traffic outside the borough, it's still using the Tempro 7.2, which has a higher level of background growth than the current Tempro 8 core. So there's some leeway sort of built into there. So yeah, at present we're happy that the Transport Infrastructure Management Group and the monitoring strategy which will be set up under that, both to monitor the development coming forward and the amount of traffic on the network, is an appropriate mechanism to regulate that, and to ensure that the right transport infrastructure improvements, both sustainable and highway, are happening at the right times. Subject to the to the progress on these schemes and the availability of additional funding towards the sustainable transport improvements. As yet, there aren't terms of reference for this group, but we will be working together with the Borough Council and with National Highways to establish that, so that it's mutually agreed, and the monitoring strategy will be mutually agreed. And it will be possible for the Transport Infrastructure Management Group to include other important stakeholders as they're required, for example, transport operators such as Metrobus, particularly when discussing the sustainable transport improvements of public transports, which are relevant to them. So yes, that's where we are in the process, and we're working on it. So we're confident that a solution is there to ensure that the mitigation is brought forward at an appropriate time. But as I said, it's entirely technically possible to do further sensitivity tests of junctions to provide further assurance.
Thank you for that. I think it's just understanding from, if I can come back to National Highways, why this may now be necessary for plan soundness, because this could be a sort of further time implications for the plan process. So I just need to understand why this kind of further detail may now may be required for plan soundness, please.
In terms of, I'd just like to say that we have a lot of areas of agreement here, and we'd like to sort of park the ongoing process, as you noted before. We believe that for the ongoing monitor and manage process to get off to a good footing, the starting position, we need a bit of a surety and confidence about the starting position for the phasing of the mitigation of the infrastructure for the SRN alongside the development. And the work required, and I think Mr. Walker and Barrow to back me up on this, is not onerous. We're not talking months of work here. The model will be in place. Could do some junction assessment with the committed development and the development strategy in the local plan and the trajectory for that. We just need that confidence that the starting position on the phasing is a reasonable basis to adopt the plan and then move forward with the monitor and manage process.
Thank you. Mr. Walkden, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that. I think at the present time, as I said, there are two pieces of infrastructure there where there is no implementation date. And as it stands, the Transport Infrastructure Management Group isn't really written into the plan at the present time. And from that point of view, there needs to be more certainty on what it looks like to be the implementation date of the infrastructure, or more needs to be written into the plan on the function of the Transport Infrastructure Management Group and what will be part of that group's sphere of influence. What will it be there to do? What guarantees do we have within the plan that it's actually going to have some teeth? I think we just need further reassurances that there will be something there in place to ensure that the critical infrastructure is not overlooked.
Thank you. I take it National Highways have seen the proposed additional text to paragraph, I think it's paragraph 8.9 of the plan. So there will be quite a bit more further text about this group, and that's potentially not going far enough.
I am mindful that I think it's point C, isn't it, on the agenda?
It is, but it's
so
being...
I'm quite happy to address it now, because it relates to this point B, doesn't it, as well?
It does. I'm happy to address, as it's been raised now, I'm happy to just try and get to the bottom of this.
Yes, I think because it links so much to point B, and just picking up the point my colleague Mr Walkden said, that we have observed the proposed modification to paragraph 8.9. Essentially, we believe because of the important role of the group, the Transport Infrastructure Management Group, in monitor and manage of infrastructure, and in our case critical infrastructure, it does need to be embedded into IM1. It seems that if that is going to be the vehicle that's going to be used to effectively monitor and manage, to oversee the infrastructure that is needed and when it's needed alongside the development, it really, if it's going to have any teeth and be implemented, it does need to feature in policy IN1. No, and that's one of the points we need to make, that if there's going to be this, as has been conveyed by the council and the county council, you know, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the role of this group, then you, at the very least, you need to embed the requirement that group will be set up. It will be made up of the infrastructure providers and bodies, and that that group will be responsible for the monitor and manage regime.
Thank you. I've made a note of that. I just wonder if we can move on to item 1C of the agenda, as we've sort of gone there, and we probably need to just move forward in terms of where we are with things. So it's been already discussed this afternoon. I think there's been various kind of reflections since the plan has been submitted about embedding the vision and validate approach from Circular 122. As I indicated at the start, the council's done its kind of has prepared a checklist, which my reading was that had been agreed with, or has formed part of a statement of common ground with National Highways. There's also been further updates to the infrastructure delivery schedule, and I should probably just point out at this stage, and I'm happy for any views from the Borough Council. I'm mindful this is a plan that's has only got a certain quantum of growth over the plan period, and as we've discussed through various kind of housing trajectory discussions, obviously a significant portion of that is already consented. It's in the pipeline, and it's hopefully going to come forward, albeit with some elements of certain uncertainties around specific deliveries subject to water neutrality, and I'm just wondering whether that's a potential issue that makes kind of predicting with specific certainty when other infrastructure improvements are likely to be required. It kind of puts in a variable as to kind of the date of that, which may be difficult to kind of pin down through further modelling. But I just wanted to briefly cover under item C, there are various other now proposed modifications to policies IM1, IN2, ST1, and the monitoring and implementation framework, which in summary, from the way I'm reading them, and kind of embed the significance of the infrastructure delivery schedule. It's something that's going to have to be given regard to. It will obviously be updated during the course of the plan period, and as mentioned just a moment ago, further kind of detail around the kind of the working group going forward. From the council's perspective, in terms of those changes, are they? Is it the council's view that they are now necessary for plan soundness to kind of reflect the Circular 122 approach and to kind of ensure consistency with the National Planning Policy Framework in terms of ensuring there won't be severe impacts on, for this afternoon's purposes, the transport infrastructure within the borough?
Yes, I think we accept, we've taken on board representations made both by National Highways and West Sussex County Council about the need for sort of clearer indication of of the mitigations required, and indicative picture of what form, timing, sequencing, roles of different parties that might take, and the proposed changes really. So the IDS is kind of, I suppose we from a CBC perspective, we've we've worked with National Highways in West Sussex in kind of putting it together, but at the same time we recognise it as a kind of a starting point potentially, and something that will be a sort of living document, but at the same time we recognise the need for it to kind of feed back into development management processes and similar, so that and to avoid a sort of silo sort of situation where the local plan has a list of projects, but that sort of picture and that evidence doesn't necessarily feed through at the development management stage. So the changes really are intended to sort of create a kind of feedback loop where the IDS feeds into the decision making process in relation to individual proposals, and we would hope that the kind of emerging picture about the development that's actually happening would feed back through the Transport Infrastructure Management Group and updates to the IDS. So you would have a kind of sort of circularity there that would be able to be able to manage the rate at which development is happening in relation to the delivery of infrastructure, and they would be able to make recommendations to the key kind of bodies, sort of decision-making bodies. So the changes proposed to the main text to IN1, that's kind of putting the reference to the IDS in there, and there again in policy IN2, the reference there is a point to make it a point of reference when new infrastructure proposals are coming forward, that can help to assess, what I guess understand the importance of those infrastructure facilities and the nature of their contribution to the borough. And then within policy ST1, there's just a clearer cross-reference back to policy IN1 to ensure that it's picked up when considering the transport implications of individual proposals. So with that taken alongside the changes to the paragraph in the reason justification to IN1 that we've discussed, and the proposed change to the monitoring indicator within the sustainability appraisal, and taking that through to the monitoring and implementation framework. The intention is that will be a sort of major feature of the monitoring that will be the monitoring that will be undertaken as an authority, and then that will provide evidence that will inform the work of the group. So yes, that's our understanding of how it would operate, and I think our reading of the national highway, the most recent National Highways submission, was that they were saying that it was a sort of either or, that in the absence of more detailed modelling at this stage about when exactly particular mitigations would be required, that the monitor and manage could be a kind of alternative way of addressing that. There's a slightly different emphasis, I think, in the comments this afternoon. But yes, that was our kind of picture of how it was intended to operate.
Thank you for that. I mean, if these changes to the various policies, the IN1, IN2 and ST1 go forward as proposed main modifications, and obviously people will get an opportunity to comment on those, but before they potentially go down that particular path, Mr. DeWitt, in terms of what I've heard from the Borough Council in reflecting your organisation's position.
Yes, it's quite clear that, and we agree with the ongoing, in order to do effective monitor and manage, which is an expectation of Circular 01/2022. We do agree with the suggestion of the Transport Infrastructure Management Group and our involvement in that. We've looked at the proposed modifications to 8.9, and we broadly welcome the proposed modifications, although there's a degree of vagueness in terms of well, there's no reference to how often that group would convene. It just says it will convene. I'm not suggesting prescribing, how many times, but I would have thought at least annually, something along those lines, that are a broad reference point, because if it's going to be effective monitor and manage, you need some sort of time frame for that. But because of its importance in terms of the delivery of infrastructure and including those sustainable solutions and making sure they're done in the right place at the right time, it does need to be embedded, the reference to that group, we feel, within policy IN1 itself. It seems bizarre that you've got a reason justification referring to the group, but the group's not referenced in terms of the infrastructure provision policy. Something along the lines of, it's something which you can crystallise, and as you say, when we respond to the consultation on the modifications, we can put this forward, but something along the lines of the infrastructure required and timing of delivery will be reviewed through a monitor and manage regime overseen by the Transport Infrastructure Management Group, involving infrastructure bodies and providers. Something broad like that captured in the policy, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. I've made a note of that. Say if these various changes to the policies go forward as proposed main modifications, then obviously they'll be open to consultation and potentially further amendment and refinements. Just moving on in terms of the agenda, we've still got a reasonable amount to cover this afternoon. Just for, I think this is a famous last words, I think this is a substantive point, but in terms of obviously the overall approach to transport modelling, this is my item 1D, and it reflects MIQs 10.3 and 10.4. It relates to the kind of the robustness of the transport modelling study that's been undertaken, and then there's obviously been further sensitivity work sits alongside that in terms of temporary trip end comparisons, looking at the implications of Gatwick Airport's DCO project and Gatwick Green trip generation. Obviously read the various statements of common ground, particularly with National Highways and West Sussex County Council, which I've interpreted as being reasonably positive about the work that has been undertaken to inform the borough plan. I'll invite now any further comments that people have on the general approach to modelling, and just a specific question, whether it's to the Borough Council or to West Sussex County Council, in terms of the implications of a potential main modification. either on the basis of the council's latest revised employment land requirement figure of 17.93 hectares. And we did touch upon this as part of the part one. If there was alternative scenarios, I mean, 44 hectares is the entire area that's been allocated through the plan, albeit with the kind of the policy mechanism that anything over the 17.93 has to demonstrate need. I think it's being informed at this stage whether the proposed modification to 17.93 hectares at Gatwick Green has any transport modelling implications, and then alternatively, if we were looking at, well, the need for a main modification, we're not saying that at this stage we've reached a conclusion on this, but if the whole site needed to be allocated now at 44 hectares, would that trigger the need for further transport modelling? Is it? Mr. Parfitt or Ms. Brigden?
Yeah, I'll just quickly start, and then I will hand over to Guy for the probably the more helpful answer. As you correctly surmised, we've published a transport modelling study. Stantec, who are also here today, be able to provide further information as well. And that was to support the local plan, and then in addition we took some further sensitivity testing, as you've mentioned. So it was the transport modelling was prepared with the technical support from the County Council throughout, and engagement with National Highways, and it did conclude that there wasn't a need for large strategic physical highway mitigation. It covered the period 2020 to 2035, and then the report itself notes that it's sufficiently robust for the to go to impacts to the 2037, and then we had technical note 1, which considered the robustness of the transport modelling study to 2040, which reflects the end of the plan period. And it concluded that the evidence presented in the note indicates that the transport evidence base used to inform the impacts of the local plan could be deemed to be robust. If there are obviously any more detailed questions on the study itself, then obviously we'll be happy to pick that up. In terms of your question regarding the capacity at Gatwick Green, the study, and this was confirmed by Guy in part 1, and obviously can be reconsidered in a bit more detail now, that in the study the employment land figure for the Gatwick Green area was 24.1 hectares. So that would cover the council's proposed modification to 17.93 hectares. It wouldn't cover the full 44 hectares, and I think that's certainly something that we acknowledged in the part 1 session, and would continue. But I will take this opportunity now to pass over to Guy to pick up anything else.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, Mr. Britton has covered sort of quite a lot of the ground that I would mention. So I'll confirm, the County Council is happy that the modelling methodology has covered over the extension of the plan period to 2040, and that's been checked through the sensitivity note, which is undertaken by Stansted, by Stantec, and I did go through the figures for Gatwick Green at the previous session. It was the 23rd of November morning session, sort of setting out the numbers of modelled trips generated by the Gatwick Green development, which were covered within the transport modelling, and as Ms. Brigden has said, that was based on 24.1 hectares site area, with specific assumptions on how the floor area of 750,000 square metres was divided between B2 industrial, B8 general warehousing and B8 parcels distribution. So on the basis of those assumptions, 24.1 hectares is the largest allocation that we would see, which wouldn't require further transport modelling work to justify it. So to keep within those numbers of trips with a higher site area, the only way really to do that is the highest trip generating activity on there as the parcels distribution would be to prevent that from coming forward in the allocation. But it would require some calculation to say exactly how much. Otherwise it would be necessary to run further transport modelling tests, and obviously the higher you go above what's tested already, then the greater the risk is that the amount of mitigation this is required encounters problems with deliverability, for example, requiring further land for highway capacity increases, or mode shares which become harder to achieve. So yeah, that's where we are with the evidence for Gatwick Green.
Thank you for that. If I can bring in Gatwick Green on this point, is it Mr. Pereira first, and then Mr. Williams?
Thank you, sir. Can I just make a few brief points in the light of your question, which asks about the implications of possible changes? And so we address this on the basis that you may be minded to change the need figure to whatever it might be. I think it's important at the outset just to observe that the 44 is not an alternative to the 17.93. In other words, the 17.93, as we understand it from the proposed modification, is to change the existing need figure in the plan. The need figures that you've had in the alternative are between 48.7 hectares, which is the Lichfields figure, and up to 69 hectares, which is the Savills figure, and I think the Ardmore figure as well. And there are some other figures in between. The 44 hectares happens to be the site area of the allocation, and on anyone's basis, the site that there will be a site of 44 hectares allocated. The question is, what does the plan say about need, and how is that governed? So that's the first point I wanted to make, that if there was to be an alternative figure to the 17.93, it ought to be one that reflects the level of need, irrespective of the site size of the allocation. The second point to remind you of, if I might, is just the way that Gatwick Green consider this ought to be dealt with, and this is set out in our reps, is that EC1 should state the need figure, whatever that might be, and EC4 should have an allocation of land, and it shouldn't then seek to micromanage the amount of land that comes, the amount of floor space that comes forward, as it does at the moment with its minimum. And that leads me on then to, I think, 5 points, and the fifth one I'll hand over to Mr. Williams on. If you do change the need figure, then the way that we suggest it should be changed, i.e. change EC1 and just don't have a figure in EC4, just allocate EC4. The implications of that are as follows, very briefly. Firstly, that makes the plan sound. It plans positively, and it is, we say, the most appropriate strategy. Secondly, it invites the market to the full potential of the allocation rather than part of it. which is important for the best outcome for Crawley. At the moment, there's a minimum figure put in. We say unnecessarily. Thirdly, it would really give the truth to the council's intention. The council's intention is that the minimum is a floor, not a ceiling. That's why it's a minimum. It's not a maximum. It's a minimum. And if that's so, it doesn't need to be stated in EC4 at all, actually. It's completely unnecessary. And fourthly, you don't need to worry yourself about the traffic implications, because the plan requires a TA for whatever application comes forward. That's in the plan. Whatever size application comes forward, it will need to be subject to a TA, and so that safeguard and control is there. And if particular development's unacceptable, it will be refused, because then the TA will support that. And then finally, there is this question of the trip budget, which we talked about last time, and the counties echoed the points made. And I'll just hand over to Mr. Williams now on that. That's to say the modelling that has been done for the plan.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's really just to follow up on, I think, the points that we raised last time, and the relationship between the site area and the allocation and the development size of the floor area, which is actually brought forward, which is what generates the traffic. So obviously, as we've heard, the CBC study looked at 77,500 square metres of employment, and that's the 24.1 hectares, with a hypothetical mix of B2 and B8 development, including the parcel delivery. And that used a range of robust trip rates. So that gave us the trip budget, which sets the benchmark to evaluate the traffic impact of the site against, which has been identified as being acceptable, with the mitigation identified. So from our appraisal, we've looked at those trip rates, and we believe there's a lot more flexibility within those rates, which can give us up to 30 hectares of development across the 44 hectare site. So for example, a floor area of circa 150,000 square metres of B8 development can be delivered within that same trip budget as the mix that's included within the model. So a net floor area of 150,000 square metres is broadly 34% of the 44 hectares, which is within a typical plot ratio of 40%. So what comes forward will depend on the market needs and will be subject to a master planning and thorough testing through a transport assessment and the monitor and manage approach. But I think the crucial point is that the traffic modelling isn't the limiting constraint to the size of the allocation, it's the level of the floor area that sets that.
Thank you for that. Is there anything further either the Borough Council or West Sussex want to say in response to what I've just heard from Gatwick Green? Mr. Parfitt.
Yes, Mr. Williams was talking along similar lines in terms of the way to increase the floor area within the amount of trips generated, referred to as the trip budget, would be to take out the parcel's use. He's referred to an area of 30 hectares. I haven't seen those calculations, so I can't, endorse or deny that would be the figure. Yes, that's a similar principle. On the matter of 30 hectares, that is relevant, though, as a statement of common ground has set out that the net developable area of Gatwick Green will be no more than 30 hectares. Yeah.
Thank you. It's now coming up to 3:30. I'm going to suggest a brief mid-afternoon adjournment at this moment. I'm just going to just check with Mr. Rollins. Thank you. Okay, we are going to, sorry, just conferring about how we're going to structure the rest of this afternoon. I'm mindful people are probably very patiently waiting for things that have rolled over from this morning. So we're going to have a 10-minute mid-afternoon adjournment. We'll come back. We're going to try and finish the remainder of item 10 within about half an hour. And then that will lead us into Mr. Rollins will be picking up policy ST4, and then we'll bring in around that the discussion around the safeguarded land area at the Manor Royal County Oak location. So if people can be back in this room, please, for 20 to 4, and then we'll resume for the final session of today. Thank you. Okay, it's 20 to 4, so I do want to resume, please, and continue the discussion. We're still on item 1. We're on item 1D. I'm going to move on in terms of some of the further transport modelling matters. And in terms of, obviously, as part of transport modelling, assumptions are made around modal shift and likely changes in travel behaviour, which will have bearings on when and what type of highway mitigation may be required over the lifetime of the plan. There's obviously the Crawley Transport Strategy, New Directions, other measures, the local cycle and walking infrastructure plan, and the kind of the reasonableness of the approach that's been taken in respect of kind of assumptions around modal shift within the borough. And perhaps we can link that into the final item under item 1D in terms of progress on delivering some of the sort of the essential, or what I've described as the essential kind of sustainable transport schemes which the council's identified in its matter 10 statement. So is it Mr. Warren to assist on this point? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So the New Directions transport strategy, I suppose, is a kind of vision document in a sense of the kind that's identified in the Department for Transport circular in terms of setting out an overall vision in terms of the greater choice of travel options, less dependence on the private automobile, and modal shift resulting from that, with a view to both the sort of climate emergency and also the potential environmental benefits of that. So that's a strategy that's been sort of agreed by the CBC cabinet, and I think that's helpful as a kind of indication of political buy-in, really, to this approach, which has subsequently fed through the other evidence and proposals. The local and cycle and walking infrastructure plan, these are increasingly familiar types of documents, really. They set out, well, they identify and work up to a certain level of detail specific proposals which have a sort of technical feasibility and also a sort of benefit in terms of sort of desire lines and population and projections about sort of propensity to cycle. So that identifies a range of different potential routes, which have been, those are sort of fed through to the infrastructure delivery schedule with varying degrees of priority attributed to them on the basis of what we would consider to be their potential ability to sort of deliver the indicative modal shift. I guess there's the specific assumptions about the extent of modal shift that is built into the transport modelling is based on what considered to be sort of reasonable expectations that are set out in the transport study. I'm not sure if, Paul, you'd be able to say a bit more about the approach in the transport study to the kind of projected modal shift.
Yeah, in terms of modal shift, we've sort of taken a three-step approach, looking at and a sort of standard approach, a distance-based assumption on trips that would potentially shift to sustainable travel, and they have come from sort of evidence from a DFT Sustainable Travel Town study, and that is something that's been recognised, used, and that effectively gives a much larger reduction for the short distance trips. and that we agreed that process both with National Highways and with West Sussex during the process of doing the modelling. We then also undertaken looking at specifically in relation to the LC whip and using the propensity to cycle tool, which again is a DFT tool, looking at potential shift and applying that on routes where there is those proposed cycle routes within the town. And then the third element of the sustainable travel reductions is actually specifically for the strategic sites where there is a level of internalisation. We've allowed for around about sort of 12% reduction of trips for sort of to reflect internalisation, because the large scale they have schools on the developments, etc. So.
Thanks. And in relation to the relationship to the highway mitigations, I suppose it's the approach that I sort of summarised before in terms of that you seek to deliver the sustainable mitigations up front, and so that the amount of highways mitigation is a sort of residual at a residual level. So the schemes that are of that nature are the M23 junction schemes, which we've been discussing at junction 10 and junction 11. With junction 10, there's the study recommended a slight adjustment to the forged wood. Some of the proposals that the works that are going forward as part of the mitigation for the forged wood development. So that's not a sort of additional sort of cost burden from the local plan perspective. And then on the county highways network, the study identified that the local plan scenarios, once you start including the full quantum of development in the local plan, that triggered a requirement for mitigation on the junction of Ifield Drive and Ifield Avenue. So that's another new. That's the only sort of new mitigation scheme on the county highways networks that's been triggered specifically by the local plan. But in addition, among the critical projects we've included are schemes to two other big roundabouts in the north of the town, the Hazelwick roundabout and the Tushmore roundabout, which are schemes that were already part of the sort of base case, but you know, we still need to, you know, keep those as part of the critical package. And in terms of the sort of sustainable mitigations, so we've sort of set out the list of these in our response to question 10. Broadly speaking, in the immediate period, the ones which are coming forward are sort of interchange and bus schemes, broadly speaking. So there's the improvements to Three Bridges Station that got it got a resolution to grant planning permission last year. The legal agreement is still in process. Then there are other schemes that are sort of interchange related. The Station Gateway, Western Boulevard, both cycling and bus. That's Western Boulevard scheme that has planning permission and is anticipated to be delivered over the course of the next year, I understand. Some other bus projects there, which are those are associated with particularly with the BSIP, the Bus Service Infrastructure Plan program. That's a program that needs to be implemented in the next couple of years, really, for sort of reasons associated with the requirements for the funding. And then in the longer term, the focus is more onto the improvements of the sort of radial cycling and walking routes, particularly connecting the town centre to Manor Royal and to the airport and to the sort of Forge Wood area, broadly speaking, where still a significant focus of development in the plan.
Thank you for that, Mr. Warren. In terms of kind of merge the kind of the two areas together in terms of sustainable transport and the kind of the critical highways mitigation schemes, in terms of their funding and delivery, are there still kind of residual gaps that kind of need to be plugged in terms of how they're likely to come forward? And I'm not going to commit Gatwick to funding anything, but in terms of things like there's various measures here. So there's the local cycle walking infrastructure, cycling plan routes that, as you mentioned, will ultimately go out and extend as far as to the airport. Does the airport itself have a role in delivering or contributing towards those, or am I stretching things kind of too far? And whether we should also have in mind, whether through the Section 106 agreement with the airport or otherwise, there are other kind of sustainable transport benefits to the borough.
So, yes, I think with the LCWIP schemes, we are anticipating that will be a kind of combination of funding from different sources. There's I suppose, we've set out in the IDS the anticipated income from developer contributions through the operation of the sort of regular planning system. Others might be able to comment on specific proposals linked to the sort of DCO work and Gatwick's own sort of ongoing programme of putting resources towards sustainable transport within the borough. And we would certainly highlight these projects as having value as a sort of focus of those resources.
Perhaps I can bring in Ms. Lepage on this, please.
Yeah, I can just help briefly on that, and I'm sure Gatwick can as well. But there's a sustainable transport fund that's levied on each parking space at the airport, and also now the new forecourt charging, and I think red route infringements also help pay into that fund. And that's sustainable transport mitigations, not just in Crawley but across the area serving the airport. But obviously it's quite a considerable amount of money annually that is then spent through the airport and the Surface Transport Forum at the airport on improvements to public transport accessibility to the airport. So it could well include some of the schemes that are identified in our IDS, or a contribution towards them.
Thank you for that. And for West Sussex County Council, please.
So the list of schemes that you've got set out within the council's written statement, I suppose, reflects some interventions which are fully funded and expected to take place, and I think the Western Boulevard scheme would fall within that category. And there are others where, and largely they are sort of presented in the sort of the medium term, where they're not fully funded at this stage. They're at a much earlier stage of development, and there is uncertainty about the levels of funding that will be available to put towards those schemes. I think that's to be expected at this stage of a local plan process. We don't really know what funding opportunities are going to be available beyond the end of next week, really. So to sort of look forward to the future, 5, 10, 15 years, we are making assumptions that central government will make funding available for public transport, active travel, and these types of interventions. The most recent iteration of, I suppose, of the IDS, specifically identifies as either critical or essential schemes those schemes which are most closely related to the development that's coming forward in the plan, and I suppose most important to mitigate those impacts. And we are, as a county council, I suppose, who will be responsible for delivering a lot of those projects, and will be taking, to some extent, the financial delivery risk on delivery of them, that the level of financial kind of expectation of government and of the county council is kind of broadly in line with what we've seen historically, but it doesn't come with kind of guarantees at this point that those funds will be made available.
If I can just finally ask of the council in relation to the critical highway mitigation schemes, in particular the junction improvements at the M23 that are identified in your Matter 10 statement, are they funded? Is that something that's linked principally to the Forge Wood development? Are you able to advise?
So in relation to the M23, there, what the scheme that's linked to the Forge Wood development is works to the junction itself, as I understand, which is due to be implemented in the short term. So that's a sort of developer funded scheme, as we would see from the perspective of the local plan. The merge diverge improvements are those. There isn't committed funding for those currently. What we're proposing in our evidence is that the scale of resources that we're anticipating in terms of developer contributions, particularly including SIL money, is of an order of magnitude which provides a reasonable degree of assurance that those will be able to be supported when those are required. But that's not committed at this stage, and I suppose part of it links back to the earlier discussion in terms of the timing and potential scope of those schemes being potentially subject to further consideration as part of the monitoring of what's happening under this local plan and potentially other development in the vicinity of Crawley as well.
Thank you for that. I've got no further questions. You may be pleased to hear on item 1D. Is there anything further people wish to say on that? Mr. Higgins, please.
Thank you, sir. And I will be very brief. It was just to follow up and confirm the comments made by Mrs. Page around the Sustainable Transport Fund that Gatwick operates under the Section 106 agreement, except just to note that that is in sort of direct response to the need to reduce sort of the least sustainable trips to and from the airport. So it is related very much to airport growth and the need for sustainable modes, rather than as a general point in terms of supporting sort of development need in Crawley. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to move on. In terms of item 1E, I think we've covered that previously under 1C. Apologies, that was probably a duplication on my part. So I'm just going to conclude on policy ST2, which is the Council's policy on car and cycle parking standards. And I think there's a proposed modification in relation to electric vehicle charging infrastructure in terms of the parking. Is it the annex to the plan, the parking annex, to remove some of the detail and then have a cross-reference to the new Part S of the building regulations. Is that correct?
That's right. There was some. We had some hesitancy about taking the sort of locally specific EV charging infrastructure standards out of the planning obligations annex. In the last year or so, there's been some uncertainty about sort of what you might think about broadly as kind of environmental regulations and sort of direction of kind of national policy on that. But we're happy that that we've got Part S now from the perspective of the amount of charging points that are required. We thought it was still helpful to keep within the parking standards annex a reference to the kind of design and location of those. We wanted that still to be sort of appropriate from the perspective of the development. So we didn't sort of delete that section entirely, but just that residual ability to consider the sort of design and location of those.
Thank you for that. I mean, in terms of what I think the council's putting forward, it's probably in the realms of being a sort of proposed main modification, so people would have an opportunity to comment on that as part of the forthcoming consultation. That draws to a conclusion item 1 on the agenda. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, Mr. Rollings, in terms of item 2. We're now moving on to the approach to the Crawley Western multimodal link.
Thanks, Mr. Spencer. I'm aware that there may be people that have been here for item 1 who don't wish to stay for item 2 or the safeguarding. So if anyone wants to leave, we can have a very brief pause in proceedings. And thank you for your contribution. Great, thank you. I don't have amazing visibility of the back rows, so if you do have your name plates up and I can't see you, then just wave or get my attention in some other way. Thank you. Also, I've got really poor eyesight for distance, so you may need to do that anyway. Okay, so the first question's on the area of search for the Western Link Road, multimodal. I just want an update on the current stage of the Horsham plan as it crosses a boundary. Does the work in the Reg 19 stage consultation that you've seen continue to suggest that there's justification for the link? Is there anything that's changed in the plan that may lead to any changes on the Crawley side of things?
I will have to confess that I haven't had a chance to properly consider the Horsham draft that was approved for at their full council to go forward to Reg 19. Their Reg 19 hasn't started yet, so I haven't been able to look at the detailed evidence that goes alongside that. As far as I'm aware, it continues to allocate or to propose the allocation of the strategic site to the west of Crawley, and on that basis we believe that the requirement for a Crawley Western link would still potentially be a matter for this local plan.
So
Sorry, can I wave at you, sir, just in case? So just as a point of clarification, just to assist on that it is the case that the Homes England west of Ifield land remains an allocation in the plan. The plan is due to go out to consultation, I think, on the 19th for a period of, I think, 6 weeks, but it may be a little longer. But anyway, so it's still there as was, and it's going for consultation next week.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parfect, I looked at you as you were nodding. Are you aware of any change in the area of search on the Horsham side at all? Do the boundaries more or less match up in Crawley?
No. I've been working with officers from Horsham District Council, and indeed that they're employing a Stantec as well on the transport study, and the assumptions for the west of Ifield allocation have remained the same through the most recent stages of the transport evidence-based study that we've been working on, which is leading up to the current Reg 19 consultation.
Thanks very much. And since the concept was originally identified in the I think it was the West Sussex Structure Plan 2001 or thereabouts, has the area of search changed at all since then, or has it remained constant since it was first designated?
It isn't a particular designation as such. It's always been identified as a link that would run from the A264 to the A23 north of County Oak. And that's probably as much as has ever been shown. The Crawley adopted local plan didn't show a line on the map because at that stage Horsham were not pursuing an allocation beyond the Kilnwood Vale site. So from that perspective, this is the first time we are sort of actually trying to identify whereabouts that potential area of search should be, so to kind of narrow it down. There were earlier studies that obviously preceded my time here that the County Council had done, but that's not necessarily where this has come from.
Thank you. And both yourself and other parties have referred to the SISTRA, I hope it's pronounced as SISTRA, not SISTRA, one or the other, work in terms of the proposed area of search, particularly with regard to the way that they identified a series of scoring in terms of the options that they went through. Do you have any comments on that work at all, and the higher scoring options?
Yeah, I will pass over to Sistra, who are here today, to support us. I think the study was commissioned by Crawley Borough Council in partnership with the County Council. Essentially, I guess probably just to give you a little bit of a rough idea of where the study came from. In the initial Reg 19 consultation for the Crawley Borough Local Plan, which we published in 2020, we did put the area of search, but it was part of the proposed area action plan policy that we have subsequently deleted from the plan, which was policy CD3. And then when we published the 2021 version of the Reg 19 version of the Crawley Borough Local Plan, it became really quite clear and apparent that there was quite a significant conflict of the area of search that we put on the plan with for the transport corridor with the land that was safeguarded for Gatwick Airport. So following that consultation and with the advice of the County Council, we commissioned the SISTRA study. And that was really to refine that area of search in light of that particular conflict, as well as the other known key constraints. So the starting point for that study was looking at the sort of compatibility or otherwise of the area of search for a potential transport link road with the safeguarding of Gatwick. And then there was a further stage which then looked at more of the details. So what the study does is look at a number of possible routes and then considers whether or not they would be feasible to be considered further. But if I pass across to Alberto from Sistra, then I think he'll be able to help.
Yeah, hello. So first of all, in the Sistra report, we define different locations for the northern section of the Crawley Western Link Road based on the constraint that the different areas between Gatwick and Crawley were characterized. For example, eastern, middle, and western section. Eastern section and middle section were similar with some environmental constraint involving ancient woodland and other type of constraints such as the river mole floodplain, while the eastern section was more characterized by urban and more industrial type of environment. And by having these different areas, we then identify different options for the route, taking account of these constraints in order to ensure that we would be able to come up with options that would have limited the impact on these constraints. After an initial analysis, we also went through a multi-criteria analysis where we used the 10 different criteria from the DFT to analyze and give a scoring at all different options. And we came up with a short listing of options for the 3 areas, which we believe that were the highest scoring and which would have represented potential solution, and which then identified the area of search. The lowest scoring one were sifted out and were not included in the area of search because they didn't represent solution that could have been feasible in terms of impact on environment, residential, businesses, and other constraints.
Thank you. And in terms of the route on the safeguarded land, how viable is it to have an interim solution?
From the perspective of this stage study, what we wanted was to not rule out the option of that being considered further. So it's not saying that the interim approach would be the one that would come forward. What it's saying is that we would allow for further investigation as part of design concepts, costing, cost-benefit analysis, and all of that. And we would be keeping that potential in the mix. So it absolutely hasn't been something that we would say it would definitely be happening. What we found through the study, and I think Alberto will probably be able to explain a little bit more, was that at this stage it didn't look like it was something that should be ruled out. I'll pass across.
Yeah, no, exactly. So especially for the eastern section, where there is the interim area of search, we believe that maintaining options ES3 and ES3A, which are the two that are defined as interim solution, were especially relevant from the impact point of view on businesses. By providing this solution, these options would have no impact on existing businesses. It would have reduced the removal of buildings, and as well as from the economical point of view and ethical point of view, would have not removed jobs and providing economic growth for the area.
Thank you. So would an ultimate southern route do those things? Would it remove jobs? Would it?
Yes, because it would go through the existing Manor Royal industrial estate, which obviously would require the removal of an extensive number of buildings, which could span up to 10. By going north of it, obviously we are not impacting on existing buildings and businesses.
That must have been an interesting balance for the council to make then, in terms of safeguarding land versus jobs and other assets. So how was that decision made?
As I say, it's not something that we've made that decision, and that's why we're keeping the option open to look at much more closely. I think you're absolutely right. It is extremely difficult. what we have acknowledged in the report is that the interim option, based on the current Gatwick proposals for the Southern Runway Master Plan, would not be in. They would be it would be in complete conflict with. So we completely accept that route couldn't come forward with the runway in its current design and formation as far as they've got now. But there is absolutely the issue that there are current jobs within the County Oak area, and that is something that we don't feel should be taken lightly, and that is why we want to retain in the plan it's distinct and it's distinguished from the rest of the area of search, and it is just an area of search at this point. It isn't showing a particular preferred route at all. And that's why the interim section is identified as a sort of different alignment, but we would like it to still be in the mix for those conversations, the evidence and the potential for the future. And obviously when it comes to a second runway scenario being brought forward, we are in a different world as well, and there could well be potentially some impact on the County Oak area by the second runway, which could potentially allow for a bit more scope for the route to be realigned. So that's all something that we think should be retained as an open position and open discussion at this point.
Thank you. I'm about to move on to delivery. Is there any comments on any of the points raised so far?
Thanks, Sir Richard Higgins for Gatwick. I think we just want to make a couple of quite succinct points, hopefully. One is, as Ms Bridgen pointed out, when the Reg 19 exercise was undertaken a couple of years ago, there was discussions with West Sussex County Council regarding the overlap between the then corridor of search and the safeguarding area as being incompatible. We have expressed our perhaps sort of our views and our disappointment in response to the SISTRA work, and it's included in the document library at ESST02I, that the latest work still retains that conflict with the safeguarding rather than avoiding it. And I think the particular point with respect to the interim option is that there doesn't seem to be significant consideration of the combined costs, disruption, and disbenefits associated with ultimately having to provide two routes to provide a solution, as has just been discussed. The other point, very briefly to make, is that within the corridor of search that is being proposed within the plan, there are very clearly, and indeed with the material that's supplied from the SISTRA reports, there are very clearly route options that do fully avoid the safeguarding, and that would appear more consistent with the approach that's being taken to safeguarding along the southern part of the airport in more general terms within the Crawley local plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Keane, please.
So thank you. Yeah, I do have some things to say on this topic, please. I'll be as concise as possible, but I do have a number of points. So the first thing I'd say is you'll recall the previous representations on behalf of Ardmore in relation to not accepting either the principle or the extent of the safeguarding under GAT2. And as I've already flagged this morning, that we consider it not justified by robust evidence, and it unnecessarily constrains what is recognised to be sustainable employment, sustainably located employment land. That said, it is accepted that the principle of the multimodal link road is justified, given the number of junctions in the borough capacity and the quantum of development that one sees coming forward. But it is Ardmore's case that a narrower area of search, or indeed a preferred option for the route alignment, should be identified. This is a relief road that has been talked about for decades, literally, and a lot of work has gone into this, and yet despite the sister work, we're still at a stage of a fairly blunt and broad and vague approach to this. The sister work, as we know, which forms part of the evidence base, analyse various alignment options. I'm particularly interested in, there were three parts divided, that work was divided into three parts, the northern section into three parts, considering 19 options, no less, for the route of the eastern end of the northern section. Two options, which we've already heard from Sister, were the top scoring under their multi-criteria analysis, ES3 and ES3A, pass through my client's Jersey Farm site. The outcome of the Sister multi-criteria analysis is that ES3A is the highest scoring of the route options, and indeed is the most closely aligned of those 19 route options to that which is proposed in the Jersey Farm master plan. And so it's back in the midst of November, but I think appended to our Matter 1 submissions was the latest version of the Jersey Farm master plan. And ES3 is the second highest scoring of the routes, and we heard from Sister a moment ago that the exercise resulted in, that sifting exercise resulted in low scoring options being sifted out. These are the two top scoring, but of course it's right to say that they both encroach into the safeguarded area by about, I think, approximately 150 metres. So we say firstly that ST4 should be modified either to reflect a narrower area of search or a preferred route alignment, and one that should reflect those higher scoring route options. So the evolution of the Jersey Farm master plan, this is quite an important point, has been designed well aware, cognizant of the design, the necessary design criteria. So both those routes, ES3 and ES3A, can be delivered, will complement the delivery of any employment development at Jersey Farm. And as our written reps make clear, so over a long period of time, the Jersey Farm project team have been working closely with Homes England, who are bringing forward that West of Ifield site in Horsham, on alignments and connections. There's been sharing of master planning, regular meetings, and the purpose, obviously, to ensure that both proposals could, and they do, complement each other in regard to layout, transport links, etc. So there's been a lot of work done there. So that's the first point on those two routes and why it's appropriate at this stage to not keep maintaining this very broad level of analysis, but that the evidence base in fact justifies a more focused approach. Because of course, in the meantime, Sarah, as we've heard throughout this examination, the effect of this safeguarding is to blight or to sterilise what is recognised by the local authority and others to be sustainable employment development. And you'll recall, sir, that the council has confirmed previously that were there to be a review of safeguarding or the extent of the safeguarding, that would warrant review of the appropriate location for a strategic employment location, because it's recognised that Manor Royal, which Jersey Farm would be the extension to, it is such a good location. There's also the point, sir, that ST4 in its current form is inconsistent with policy GATT2. I won't revisit that, because again you've heard from us from that point. And then as a last point at this stage, sir, before I come to this, I want to say a bit about interim options, but I'm going to take this next point, sir, by way of a final point here, and also to try and roll in what we didn't get to this morning in relation to Manor Royal and the relationship of the road or the safeguarding. So the policy at the moment doesn't provide sufficient clarity, one, over the status of the area, but secondly, in particular, to the status of any area to the south of any relief road that might come through. Because if you were to consider that it was appropriate for safeguarding to be adjusted to accommodate these preferred routes, then that would open up, I think, roughly speaking, don't quote me on this, but it's about, of the 17.2 hectares on my client's site, approximately 12 hectares are south of the alignment of the ES3, ES3A route, 5 hectares to the north. So there's no contemplation in policy of that at the moment. The other factor, sir, is of course the relationship of the road and existing development to the designation of the built-up area boundary, and that's where I want to go back to a matter that I would have come to this morning, because the safeguarding area in the emerging plan as proposed extends further south into Manor Royal compared to the extant 2015 local plan. And we say that further extension is not justified for the same reasons that we object to the rest of it. You'll recall, sir, that your fellow inspectors, inspector in 2015 looked for and endorsed infill opportunities and extensions to Manor Royal, given all the constraints that there are. And my client site, Jersey Farm, which we've been talking about so far compendiously, is comprised of a number of smaller elements, as you know. Site A, and again it's listed specified in the master plan, but Site A at Jersey Farm is one such site, an infill opportunity and extension, granted planning permission already. Is it being built?
It's extant,
yeah. Extant, being built out or has been built out. There's Site B where there's a planning application which I think is still undetermined, is that right?
No current application.
No current application, all right. I missed, anyway, Site B. Also outside the safeguarding area, but the extended area is now proposed to in a way that would further therefore limit flexibility at the fringes of Manor Royal. So the council's approach, as I understand it, is to, in terms of economic growth, is to encourage the intensification of existing employment land supply. It's acknowledged there are limited opportunities to do so, certainly in a sustainable locations such as Manor Royal. And therefore that would apply just as much to the areas sought to be extended now when compared to the extant local plan, because that would represent further unnecessary adverse constraint to additional development opportunities. And so, final point on this before I turn to interim, the representations made on behalf of Ardmore elsewhere in relation to, is it policy CL8 in particular, deal with matters such as the alignment of the built-up area boundary. And of course what it's not doing at the moment is reflecting the reality on the ground of Site A, which has been granted permission, has been built out or is being built out, and Site B, which is outside. So that, at the very least, sir, is perhaps a more minor matter, but is a matter that definitely needs to, it's a wrinkle that needs to be addressed in due course. Can I just say something briefly about interim options, sir, and then I've got a bit more to say later when you come on to deliverability, but I can stop there for now. The suggested interim approach is not pragmatic or sound, and would, as your question suggests, or perhaps raises the possibility of be ineffective, costly, and unjustified complexity, because so what it proposes is an interim route, presumably taking advantage of the sort of ES3 or ES3A line, unless and until a southern runway is pursued by Gatwick Airport. Well, we've heard this morning about, and previously about, likely timescales on that, and the northern runway project taking us through to 2038, etc. There's no evidence that any such interim route would be deliverable or viable. All we've heard today from the council is more uncertainty. So there's no evidence deliverable viability or deliverable or viable for an interim route before any finalised route was created in due course. And of course, the adverse impacts and the disruption, let alone the ambiguous signals sent to investors and landowners and occupiers that would be caused by such interim measures would be substantial and unjustified. And so, sir, that isn't a sound approach, and further certainty is required.
Thank you. Ms Sargent.
Thank you. So just briefly to note on the SISTRA document, this for your reference is 7.9.3, and at 7.9.2 the SISTRA document says essentially GAL object to the retention of route options ES3 and ES3A, and then it goes on to say that the analysis demonstrated that those two options could have substantial positive aspects in comparison to the other eastern route options. But you'll have noticed, sir, that in the criteria that were considered in section 7.2, there was no weighting given to the fact that ES3 and ES3A encroach on the safeguarded land. And so in GAL's submission, that should have been something that factored into that assessment, and it would have reduced the performance, evidently, of those two route options. So although the council say, well, we're keeping these in because they perform well, they only perform well comparatively because no sufficient or indeed real substantive consideration was given in the analysis to the fact that they were encroaching on the safeguarded land. The only other point I wish to address was this proposed interim approach. I wasn't sure that I had understood correctly that what was being suggested by the council was that a road would be constructed, and then if the second runway came forward, it would need to go away and another road would be constructed. But if I have understood that correctly in my submission, that is obviously an unsound approach. It's unsustainable, it's unnecessary, costly, and I agree with my learned friend Mr Keane's submissions as to why that's inappropriate as a route forward here. If we're going to return to the Manor Royal and County Oak point from this morning again later, then I'll leave that there. Okay.
And Mr Keane, I was going to speak for Mr Spencer when I said we will return to that point as well.
So that's kind. I'm trying to do it in a way that wraps it all up as we go along, but I reserve the position, if I may, that I might want to revisit a specific Manor Royal point when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Based on that, I have two questions for the council. I recognise the high-level approach in the area of search, but is there any potential for a narrowing of the search corridor at this point, given what I've heard today, and also the multitudinous requests from other people such as Sussex Wildlife Trust, environmental firms, other landowners? And the other question that I have is there any potential for any conflict with GAT2?
In terms of narrowing, I think that is something we would wish to resist. The SISTRA report clearly does show there are lots of options, and I think that is something we would certainly want to investigate further. The options further south have significant other impacts, and I think that not one of the routes put forward in the SISTRA report would necessarily be a final route. It could be that it weaves, depending on the constraints on the actual ground. And I think from the perspective of the council, this isn't a road that is required for mitigating development coming forward within the Crawley Borough local plan. It is tied very much to development outside of the borough, and as well potentially growth at Gatwick. From that perspective, I think that it is entirely reasonable for the council to want to retain as much flexibility as possible when looking at more detailed approaches, particularly with its partners. In terms of conflict with GAT2, I'm going to answer very shortly on this, and then I'll if others want to come in. GAT2 would apply. That's the position of the local plan. The safeguarded, the area of search for the road is simply an area of search for the road, and all of the other policies in the local plan would apply as part of further consideration. So GAT2, with its safeguarded constraints, would still apply, and that would still need to be in conversations with Gatwick Airport and to satisfy them. So I'm going to pass across to the County Council.
From a County Council perspective, I suppose as a potential promoter of this road at some point in the future, it is helpful at this point in time to keep options open. With all due credit to Sistra and the Borough Council in the work that they've done to date, it is not, as it stands, sufficient in sufficient detail to select a preferred route. So the position that the Borough Council is taking in saying, well, this is a proportionate piece of work and it allows us to present an area of search, but that it would be for a future promoter of the scheme to take a decision on the preferred route is certainly one that we support. And as part of that process, the viability of any of the options, and in relation to options that go into the safeguarded land, the longevity, I suppose, of any kind of road built within the safeguarded area would need to be taken into account in a viability assessment. And I guess whether it is viable or not really depends on what view you take on the how long it could be in place before a southern runway at Gatwick was brought forward.
Thank you. Yes?
Sorry, sir, if I may, just a very brief point in response to comments from Ms Bridgeton. There's no evidence in any of the work that's been undertaken by GAL or indeed in respect of the Sistra work to show that the link road is required in any sense in respect to growth at Gatwick, neither in respect of the Northern Runway proposals, background growth, or indeed the Airports Commission work that's related to the safeguarding. Thank you.
Are there any more points on that? I'll move on to delivery. Thank you. Okay, in response for the submission from Homes England, the rep from Homes England, there was a concern that the policy as written is a bit shifty on delivery and doesn't include any mechanisms on when the road would be brought forward, when the link would be brought forward. Is there any potential for that within the policy?
As I said before, the policy isn't seeking to deliver the route of the road. It is seeking to identify an area of search for a road to come through. From that perspective, the studies that the council have done haven't looked further, other than in terms of that very high level feasibility and providing that first initial step on that approach. When it comes forward and by whom, obviously, will depend on the outcomes of further discussions.
Okay, and in terms of, I suspect I'm barking up the same tree here, but in terms of the criteria in criterion A, the factors which the proposal needs to take account of, is that a strong enough wording in terms of taking account of, should it have regard to, for example, many of the submissions have put forward that the wording is kind of weak, especially in terms of its environmental provisions?
I think the council will be happy to consider stronger wording if that was felt was necessary. I think we believed that it was robust, but if that's not considered to be the case, then I don't think we would have a particular concern.
Thank you. A question on the traffic modelling to the east, the Stantec work. How does the modelling take account of possible future traffic growth that may arise from the Gatwick extension? and it mentions that signalling or signal phase changes would be appropriate in terms of mitigating new traffic from the link. But in terms of looking beyond that, how would trips be affected?
The technical note which Stantec undertook on the Gatwick DCO looks to sort of identify the potential amount of additional sort of impact from the DCO in combination with the local plan, and as you've said, it does indicate that the impacts are such that they don't necessarily exceed the amount of difference that could be achieved by making relatively simple alterations to traffic signals, junctions within the town, across the area. It hasn't gone into more detail about sort of further mitigations, as that's seen as best addressed through the DCO process itself, which is being looked at through a different model which Gatwick have developed. So it's not necessarily seen as helpful to have two alternative sets of mitigation designs for the impact of the DCO. The DCO process will need to take into account the Crawley local plan as well. So it's best that the final mitigation strategy for the Gatwick DCO is dealt with through the transport evidence for the DCO process, where it can clearly be associated with that development and how it's funded, rather than a separate set of recommendations coming out of the local plan process, when the DCO itself is not part of the local plan.
Thank you. I can't see any at the moment, but does that have any implications on ST4 at all? Would the outcome of the DCO process have any implication?
I'm not aware of such implications, no.
Are there any other comments on the Western Link Road?
Before we get to deliverability, sir?
Or we've raced through deliverability,
right.
But I'm willing to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Thank you. First point before I do that, can I just respond to something that the council mentioned a moment ago, which is in response to an answer to your question on consistency of ST4 and GAT2. And so I'm repeating myself, but you'll be well aware that we say that there is an inconsistency because GAT2 continues to safeguard land for a possible future runway within the area of search for the road. Of course, unless and until the council decides that it needs that safeguarded land for a road or elsewhere for employment. So there is that fundamental inconsistency of approach. On deliverability, sir, I'll be brief again. There is a route within the area of search under policy ST4 that is deliverable in principle. You won't be surprised to hear me say which part of it could be, because of the points I've already made on ES3, ES3A through the Jersey Farm site, those high scoring of the route options under the Sistra study. And so Ms. Sargent said earlier, well, that scoring system didn't factor in the safeguarding, and had it done adequately, it would have affected the weighting. But of course, that assumes, as the airport does, that safeguarding is an absolute constraint. And again, you know the difference between the parties, or some of the parties, on that point. But so as to deliverability through Jersey Farm, So I already indicated the level of cooperation with Homes England on the land west of Ifield, but what's clear from the written reps, and I'll just summarise it briefly, is that the Jersey Farm master plan includes a new access road west of the A23 London Road, which has been aligned to facilitate future provision of the Western Link Road, so that the farm access road can meet those criteria and form part of that road in due course, including making provision for bus provision, etc., as per the design criteria, pedestrian cycleways. Of the Sistra analysis in relation to those feasible options after the sifting, don't ask you to turn it up, but section 7.9.4 of the report cites several feasible options for the eastern section. I think there are 5 or 6. But the options, I think all of those options, other than ES3 and ES3A, would have a significant adverse impact on the extant main employment area at Manor Royal, because whichever way you look at it, they would unsustainably require the removal of between, I think, 4 and 10 existing commercial properties. Pick up on your point, sir, about that tricky balance for the council with real jobs, real companies out there. This proposes to demolish, take out 4 to 10 of them, and that's properties in existing productive employment uses in a sustainable main employment location, disrupting or destroying existing businesses and further reducing what we all know is an already very constrained supply of employment land in the borough. And one last point on this, we've of course heard a lot from Gatwick about how difficult it would be, how essential it is that the safeguarding stays as is. But when you look at the council's analysis of this and why in particular, despite Gatwick's dogged objection to ES3 and ES3A, they have nevertheless kept ES3 and ES3A in as options worthy of further work, is that it's clear that the council at least considers that GAL has acknowledged that future design development work is required both for the Western Link Road and for Southern Runway work. So we're back to relying on the 2019 master plan. Is it locked in stone or is it not? We've heard a bit about that this morning. But so if you look at the council's answers to your matters, issues and questions on question 10.10 or 10.9, 10.10, so 10.9.13 to 14, 10.9.23, you see reference to, well, it may be not straightforward. It may be there may be implications, but it's not saying it's impossible, nor should it, sir, given the level of detail that we've seen set out in that master planning. So there is, I can't speak for the whole of the route, obviously, sir, but as far as my client's interest is concerned, there plainly is a deliverable part of that Western Relief Road that could be built to designed to the appropriate standards, and of course would come forward as part of any Jersey Farm development in terms of the cost of it.
I'll offer the council the opportunity to respond if it wishes.
No, I don't have anything to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we return to the issue of safeguarding, the matter of safeguarding, is there any more comment on the Western Link Road or the Western Road Link, multimodal? Thank you, everyone. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you. Before we close for today, I will pick up a couple of issues from this morning in relation to safeguarded land boundary at Manor Royal, County Oak, one of which has already been referred to by Mr. Keane already this afternoon. So I'm going to start with that first, and just to understand the justification for the precise boundary that's now shown. And the reference to it now extends slightly further south along parts of London Road, so bringing us closer to the Fleming Way roundabout. Obviously got representations in relation to the, I hope I pronounced this correctly, the Panat Tony complex on the Manor Royal estate. and it would also appear to extend marginally southwards within Manor Royal as we sort of move across to the Gatwick Road, Tinsley Lane North location. So by reference, just looking at plan 20 and also at plan 21 in terms of the 2019 master plan, just to understand the justification and the soundness for amending the safeguarded land boundary in this location as part of this plan. Has the council simply taken the latest safeguarded land plan that's in the 2019 master plan?
Yeah, as we set out in our response on MIQ 528, we have looked at the evidence, and similarly with the evidence we've been looking at with the Appendix A5 from the 2014 documentation, and that's the evidence which provides the justification for the boundary in the master plan, and it's taking into account, as I think Mr Higgins mentioned this morning, the realignment of the A23, and also, as we understand it, the diversions of the River Mole and the operational requirements. And we consider those to be critical infrastructure elements for the delivery of the southern runway. So we've accepted that alignment from the master plan.
Thank you. If I can hear from Gatwick on this point, is there anything further from either Mr Higgins or Mr Norwood in terms of the necessity, the justification for making these amendments specifically in the Manor Royal location, given its potential implications for existing kind of business premises in that location? Is it Mr Norwood?
Yeah, thank you, sir. The starting point for how we do the master plan is to use the reference point of the existing runway today. And in order to achieve what we call independent operations, that's what we say would be mixed mode operations, the runway to the south would need to be 1,045 metres to the south. And then there are international requirements that then govern the extent of the separation distances between things like taxiways and the perimeter fence. So if you do the calculations, what happens is that you then get to your security fence, which is right at the southern boundary of the airport. And then obviously we do have to fit in road system. And then obviously there's a diversion, as we've mentioned, of the River Mole and Croters Brook as well. So it's all quite formulaic as to how we achieve the separation distances from that main runway. And that was the work that was done in 2014, the more detailed work that was done in 2014 as part of the Airport Commission work. And I think if I can probably draw your attention to Appendix 3 in Gatwick's Airport's MIQ, the first MIQ, Appendix 3. That actually shows the difference between the boundaries. Now it's, I'm sorry that my graphics team have decided to have one line in bright red and the other line in pink. It doesn't make it as clear as it could be. Apologies for that. But I think there you can see the difference between the two boundaries, sir, and it's quite clear where those differences are. And you can see that in the 2014 alignment, what that is doing is it's trying to tie in with, say, the existing road network or existing road junctions. So you can see the little tweaks that have been undertaken to the boundary in order to tie it in to the existing road system. So there's not big differences because the international standards have been set from the core datum point of the existing main runway. But the detailed work that we undertook in 2014 then tries to tie it in to the existing arrangement. And that's why you can see in some instances the boundary goes in and in other instances the boundary goes out. So it's just a result of the very detailed work that was done at the time.
Thank you. So there's the 1,045 very specific 1,045 metre separation, presumably from midpoint of. Is it from runway edge to runway edge, or is it taken from mid?
Oh, good question, sir. I think it's from centre line to centre line.
Okay, so that dictates the degree of separation from the existing wide space.
From the existing single runway, yes.
Yep. Going then further south, are there prescribed distances, Mr. Norwood, in terms of separation distance from the edge of the new additional wide-spaced runway to kind of the nearest...
To the security fence.
To a... is it what I'm probably trying to get to in a sort of very long-winded way? Is there then a further distance from the edge of the new run, if there was a new runway, to what the nearest highway, physical feature? Is there a safety distance? I don't know if you're able to explain.
I understand the point.
Any flexibility on the master plan has shown in terms of bringing things closer to the proposed runway?
No, so the distance between the new runway and what we would call the security fence, there's a set distance for that. And then literally alongside the security fence, you then have your road. You would obviously need to have some form of landscaping in there to try and soften the boundary. That would be outside the security fence. But as I say, that would need to accommodate things like the River Mole corridor and the Crawters Brook channel. And then there would be you would have to have a small amount of landscaping just to soften the edge.
Thank you. So if I can bring in, I'll come back to Ardmore in terms of any further submissions on this. I understand, recall from your contributions to the Part 1 hearings, an in principle kind of objection to the approach to safeguarding. Without prejudice, if we're minded to find safeguarding is justified and is a sound approach, in light of what I've heard this afternoon from Gatwick Airport, and going back to the original statements in terms of the precise nature of the boundary or any kind of flexibility in terms of perhaps the similar way the council's looked at the Gatwick Green location, does Ardmore have anything to say in terms of what I've heard that if a southern runway does go ahead, there are these kind of parameters within which it will have to take place? And that brings us to effectively the position we're at now in terms of the boundary or extent of the safeguarded land that perhaps doesn't have parallels to what we've been discussing in relation to Gatwick Green.
Yeah, so there clearly are differences for all sorts of reasons, but and I don't seek to, if there's a minimum distance between runways, then of course that's what's required. If there's a minimum distance to a security fence, fine. But beyond that, as we've heard, there's roads, there's landscaping, there's noise buns. We have no detail as to the flexibility that might ensue from doing that in a way that's different from what is shown on the 2019 master plan in the level of detail that it is, that would necessarily preclude a more flexible approach. Do you want to add anything to that?
Just to say, so that's really helpful to have that from Gal, but that is the first time that we've heard about any of these distances. So I appreciate that we're not in a position with a development management process, but at no point further to the comments this morning have we seen any detail in a master plan that requires those types of distances to be away from any certain development. Indeed, the only plan we have to go on is 20 that indicates that the site nearest to us is a noise bund and some landscaping. So further clarification would be really helpful from Gatwick Airport in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood. I'm looking at Plan 20 from the airport master, the 2019 airport master plan. I appreciate it's taken an angle probably furthest point away from the area where we're discussing, and I suppose at this scale and level of detail, probably just shows probably a conflation of kind of perimeter bunding and the realigned. Is it the A23 at that point? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Maybe one of the other plans you can look at is in the Appendix A5, the Operation Efficiency Master Plan, which is part of the evidence base, which I think Mr. Forsdick took you to this morning. In that, and that's where the distances actually are in that. So where you'll find the distances of 1,045 and the various requirements, but there are master plans in that document, which I think show in not a great amount more detail, but maybe a little bit more easier to read about the layout and the boundary, and it shows you where the sort of the green edge of the airport is linked into the final boundary.
Thank you. I'm taking it as read that any re-diverted A23, it's currently a dual carriageway standard, would need to be re-provided or re-provided at that standard, particularly if it's ultimately potentially going to connect into a western multimodal link. Excuse me, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you. Yes, yes. To confirm that the approach that we took was to both re-provide the A23 in order to connect it with adequate capacity in comparison to its current alignment, but also, and it's not actually sort of directly on this part of the corridor, but in correspondence with some of the comments that have been made earlier on, we are providing cycling and walking connectivity both in parallel to the A23 and indeed across from the A23 towards Antlands Lane, which then crosses the M23 for wider community connectivity. I would just very briefly, sir, just draw your attention to Plan 22 in the master plan, which gives you a slightly clearer view of the alignment of the A23 diversion. So the green line as it's shown on that plan through the area in question for this particular point is perhaps clearer on that plan.
Thank you, that's helpful. Are there any further points that Ardmore wish to make in relation? I mean, I've got your points, they're noted, thank you. If there are no further submissions or points people wish to raise after what's been a very long day for this examination, can I thank everybody for their contributions throughout the day. As things currently stand, this is the last day I think we're due to sit in the Town Hall building. We resume next week via online sessions, so can I thank the Council for providing this venue. It's been almost a privilege, I think, to be sort of one of the first kind of public, major sort of public events within this new building. Whether Mr. Rollins and myself have grown and rejoiced, we'll have to reflect on as we consider all the evidence that's been put before us. But we'll draw today's session to a close, and we'll be seeing people again online on Tuesday next week for further sessions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. They're not going to.
And that is the ICAO standard.
Works now.
Yeah.
Oh.